So, hello everybody. So we start today on the ninth session, training session on photonic, mastering quantum computing. So we'll be doing concretely hands-on stuff today on variational quantum algorithm. So we start the first part of the session I will present variational quantum algorithm in general. I will show how it works for photonics. We will talk also about some other frameworks. And the second part will be implementing them on notebook and try to see exactly how we can code exactly the same prime with Qiskit, PennyLane, and Candela, Perceval. So let's start. I will be by myself today. So if you have any question, please Doyun, please not check the chat and let me know because I won't be able to see the chat during the presentation, and during the
Okay.
notebook we'll look at the chat, but during presentation I won't have the way to look at the chat.
Okay.
So let us start.
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, so let us go through variation algorithm today. So the goal will be first to discuss about what we want to do. I will mention also VQE, which is one of the famous variation algorithm, but I will highlight also the difference on what we are usually doing when we are doing VQE or VQC, for instance. I will give a very quick comparison with Qiskit and PennyLane. I don't know how familiar you are with both, but in any case, uh, it will be going step by step. So normally you should not have any problem to follow. And then we'll move to the Jupyter notebooks, where we'll be concretely implementing a variational quantum calcifier on Qiskit first, then PennyLane, then Perceval. And we'll try to understand exactly what is happening behind the scene for the three notebook. So why are we interested in quantum variation algorithm? One of the reasons is that it has been proven that it's quite resilient to noise and decoherence. So it's probably one of the first application that will be suited for NISQ platform. So whatever NISQ is 100 qubits, 1000 qubits is still NISQ and it's still noisy. So this is something quite easy to implement today, and we already can show some results on very small use case. One nice thing too is that it's quite flexible to the technology, and it is really the core of this lesson today is that if we will see that whatever you are doing, you have a way to implement some variational algorithm using a quantum hardware. There is no need to use logical qubits, and we have seen several times before in the class that logical qubits are quite tricky to implement using photonics because we need to use some probabilistic gate. So the fact that we don't absolutely need to use logical qubits has some interest. I will show that photonic also might have some competitive edge because of the size of the space that we are manipulating, and also the fact that we are concretely using a circuit where we can fine-tune parameters directly on the circuit. The parameters are very concrete, so we'll discuss about that. In inversion algorithm, we are exploiting the large search space of the quantum space, and with very small number of parameters. So something I like to mention usually is that if we think about very large language model like ChatGPT today, it may have between 10 to 100 billion of parameters. So it's quite a big numbers, but such numbers is reached with 40 qubits or only 20 photons. So I'm not saying that we are the 20 photons photonic quantum computer is competing with ChatGPT in terms of power, but we are manipulating the same space, the size of the same huge dimensional space, and this is one of the strengths of the neural network today, is that we are using a space, we are projecting information in a large space in which we can make some computation. And actually, it's one of the reasons why a language model worked, is that we were able to project words that don't have any dimension into thousand dimension space where we can make computation on the words. So by using quantum processor units, we have the same ability. We are projecting information in a space. So information can be can have very low signal, can have some information that human cannot see. But by projecting this data in a large space, we open ability to make computation on this space and find something classification, find some evidence for a large language model. We are talking about generating language, but it can be whatever we want. When we have the information in the space, we can think about all application of machine learning today. So again, I'm not saying that there is a competition between two, but we are sharing the fact that we are manipulating a large search space and with very low number of parameters. So which is very interesting, and it's one of the reasons that we are globally interested in quantum variational algorithm. There has been some evidence of accelerated convergence. For instance, in reinforcement learning, we can prove that a quantum neural network can converge faster than a classical neural network. So there is some architecture, neural network architecture, where we combine quantum neural network and classical neural network, and the use of the quantum part is to accelerate the convergence, the initial convergence. And as I mentioned, we believe that we might be able to detect weak signal through quantum embeddings. So there is some evidence on that, and there is a lot of research on quantum variational algorithm and quantum neural network in general. Something to know and to be very careful about is that I mentioned an analogy and comparison with neural network. Something that we can say that it cannot scale, and we already know that it will not scale to huge data sets. For a very simple reason, is that when you are training a language model, for instance, with huge data set, you are talking about hundreds of millions of billions of data points. It is basically sentence that has been collected online. And when we do the training, then we send the sentence by batch on the GPU, and GPU is very good because it can parallelly process a lot of data points. And using a farm of GPU, then and a lot of time people can train very large language model. With quantum processor, we don't have this ability because as we saw in previous session before, a quantum processor is not doing any computation, it's just sampling. So when we want to send data to training data to a quantum processor unit, it will need to be first one by one. So you are embedding the data as we'll be doing today in the parameters of the quantum circuit. And then we need to sample the circuit, produce sample on this training data to be able to compute some measurable, some observable, as we'll be seeing today, that allow us to make some gradient descent. And so each iteration, so first is one by one sentence by one sentence, one data point by one data point. And then we need to make thousands and probably more sampling before being able to do anything on the training data point. So when on one side for GPU, you can send 10,000 data points simultaneously in parallel, with quantum processor unique, you need to make thousands of samples for one single data point. So there is really a difference here, and people sometimes say that quantum neural network will change everything. They will not apply to this big area where classical AI is applying. So no huge data sets. Physically, you will need to wait for multiple years before training your model. And multiple years for a quantum processor unit is very long. So it will change its calibration several times during the training. So at the end, you will not even have trained anything. You will have nothing. So it's really a limit of this approach. For photonic, there has been a lot of research on that. There is one paper that is very often quoted. It is the paper that I show on the right, Fock state and expressivity of quantum machine learning model. So and this paper is really analyzing the theory of a photonic quantum variational algorithm. And he based everything on this type of circuit here, where we have multiple blocks, and we'll go through these blocks in the notebooks. We have a block of parameters. We have a block where we can store the variables of the prem, and we have another parameter block. So as a reminder, we read that type of circuit. Here is the number of photons that are sent in the first mode, so N1 photon. This is a block, unitary block with parameterized by θ1. There is a second block here that we adjoin to the first one with one single variable x in that example, but it could be more. And there is another block of parameters. Then you have these detectors at the end. That's we use to detect the presence of photon. So we can compute the unitary of such circuit. So it is something like U is W1 SX W2 θ2. θ1, θ2 are the transformation parameters. So it's a collection of parameters, and X the input data. And we can define the quantum model as the expectation value of the measurable m, the lambda. We see why we have a lambda here of this unitary matrix. And one thing interesting that is really well defined in this paper is that we can express the quantum model as this formula that I put on my slide, and this formula is a Fourier transform so this is very clean, because we can easily show that if we can have that shows that we have the power of decomposition in Fourier functions. So we already expect that we can naturally solve mathematical problem like differential equation, partial differential equation, or any type of equational problem, because we have the support of this Fourier transform behind the scene, formal support. And we can even detail what is the expressivity of this Fourier transform by understanding what are the parameters. And I let you to to read this paper that is very nice and explain everything in details here. Something in detail something that I mentioned too is that we talked about detectors. I just want to remind you that there is two types of detector, one that are photon number resolving, what you call PNR, and one that is threshold detector. Threshold detector means that we are only able to detect photons, one or more photons. And PNR means that we are able to make differentiation between 1, 2, 3 photons and 0 photon, of course. And this is important, in fact, because in simulation, generally, we are expecting that we can count the photons. So technically, it's not that easy to know how many photons we have in each mode. And this changes the expressivity of your model because Fock space is big, is very big. One reason of that is that you can bunch photons together in the same mode. But if you bunch photons together, then you want to know that you have bunched photons, then you need to be able to count them. So usually we need, and the most powerful model expects the circuit to have the photon number resolving ability. And we'll see today in the concrete example that we'll go through that practically we can simulate and we can make what you call pseudo PNR. Using more modes, we can in fact make something a bit similar to PNR without having the technology, the PNR detectors themselves. Just I was mentioning the size of the space and the size of the space. If we have PNR, so photon number resolving, we can calculate the size of this space. And basically, you see that the dominant term is this one. And this one is the number of combination of M or N photon in N plus M mode. So this is a combinatorial, the number of combinations, this is a combinatorial term, and it scale like a factorial term. And if you take, for instance, two modes for one photon, which is what we are doing in most of the case, then we can prove that using the Stirling formula that it is asymptotically equivalent to 4 power n when n is big. So 4 power n is to be compared to the 2 power n that you get when you are manipulating Hilbert space, so when you are manipulating qubits, basically. So this is the thing that we need to keep in mind. And so one of the reasons why this is so important this is so interesting to do variation algorithm with photonic device. Another parameters that we'll be looking at, and it is what I mentioned in the introduction, is that here we see a circuit. We see a circuit exactly as we could see a circuit in Qiskit with gates. But and we can compute the unitary of the circuits. We can use parameters in the circuit like θ1, x, and θ2, and we can manipulate the unitary transform, which is totally okay. And we saw that in the numerous class that we had before, is that we can compute output of the photonic circuit using the unitary and calculating the permanence of the unitary, which is practically theoretically what happens is we have this unitary transform. But here there is something a bit different when you are doing photonic and clearly different than when you are using gate-based. So we mentioned that in the photonic circuits, qubits are flying. Are flying through the circuit. So you have photons, and the photons are called flying qubits because it is the photons that carry the quantum state. And we generate single photons at the beginning. The photons are synchronized at the input of the photonic chip, and then we are sending the photon through the chip. and the photons are flying through the chip and detected at the end. So flying qubits versus static qubits. When you are gate-based model, your qubits are matter qubits. So you can point them, you could touch each qubit individually because they are atoms, they are electron, they are spin of electron, they are whatever. The quantum state is matter, so it's located, it's very well defined. For photons, the photons are flying, so the photons are moving. And if we understand that we have this opposition between the static qubits and the flying qubits, we have exactly the same way opposition between static circuits and flying circuits. So for photonic, the circuit is static, meaning that we will see that when you go to the cloud later today, we can see the structure of the circuit. We know that the circuit has some parameters. And what is the unitary we define? We can map this unitary into the circuit. And it is what we saw in one class, in the last class, where we talk about compilation. You can map any unitary inside a generic interferometer. But you can also see the circuit as something where you can modify directly a generic interferometer where you can modify directly the parameters. So when we see a circuit like that, photonic circuits, and when we know that we'll be sending this circuit in the generic interferometer with fixed parameters, then we can design a variation algorithm where each parameters of your circuit is a physical parameters. So we can leverage the physical circuit that we have in photonics. So, and this is very important because if we can do that, then that means that first the model will learn parameters that are physical, so it will be able to learn the imprecision, the noise that is on each parameters individually. Each parameter will behave as a physical device because it is a physical device. The second benefit for that is that if you train a photonic quantum variation algorithm, at the end, and if you store the parameters that you have learned, you come back 1 month later, you can still process and you can still compute exactly the same value out of your circuit because you just reprogram your chip with the parameters you have learned. If you compare that to gate-based approach models, you have physical static qubits, but you have flying circuits. The circuit is virtual. So when we, in a variational quantum algorithm, we are learning parameters of circuits that is running on the gate-based logic, on matter qubits, the parameters you are learning are virtual. It's like it is a flying circuit that apply on physical qubits. And this means that if the matter qubit is slightly different, if the electronic control is slightly different, which is always the case because you know this machine needs to be calibrated every day, every hour, then when you have trained your model, you cannot come back 1 day later and reapply your model on your processor unit because everything has changed. Since you don't have physical parameters, you have virtual parameters. You cannot reapply the same transform. So this is another big difference between gates, matter qubit and photon qubits. So let's start on some algorithm. So I will go through first variational quantum eigensolver on the theory part, and again we'll come back to all of that completely in the second part of the session today. So I will talk about variational quantum eigensolver. You have a notebook that is on the documentation of Perceval, where you have a step-by-step variational VQE algorithm that is detailed, so you can look at the documentation. I will more look at what we are trying to do when you are talking about variational VQE. And when I say it is the first use case that we running in Haskella, is that it is actually the very first algorithm that we run on the QPU that you have online. that is named as Kela. And so it was really our starting point. Can we apply a variational quantum Hilbert solver on the photonic chip? So for some of you that are not familiar with VQE, I just remind you what is VQE. So we are talking about molecular ground state energy. So you have different atoms in a molecule, and the configuration of the atoms, that is the distance between the different atoms, and the spatial configuration of the atom in space, is defined as what you call a many body problem. So we have all these particles that position themselves. It's like the planet in space. They have some attraction force and there is some repulsive force. The planet cannot be too close. The atoms cannot be too close one to the other. But at the same time, they are attracted because they are sharing some electrons. So there is some energy behind that. And we can define that as finding what you call the ground state energy of the molecule. And the ground state energy is basically what the nature is computing at every moment, at every atom in any molecule in your body is stable, and this is the position of the different particles and are solved by the nature in some way. So the nature is making a computation, making that the position and the relative position of the different particles are solved by what nature is doing. So you remember in the very first class we mentioned about Feynman conjecture, saying that to solve this type of problem we need to have a quantum computer, because these problems are very hard, and the only technology that will be able to really solve this problem is quantum, because quantum is doing the same. We have the same type of tools when we in quantum computer to solve. And basically the problem could be summarized and finding the ground set energy. So we can formalize that, and we can define what you call the Hamiltonian of the system. And the Hamiltonian will be kind of the way to describe all the constraints that you have between your particles, and we need to solve and to find the minimal energy according to this Hamiltonian. So this is the formal definition of the VQE problem. And again, it is super complicated because you have this many body problem. So I think this is the H2O, where you have a lot of degree of freedom between you have only 3 atoms, but you have something like already a 9 degree of freedom for your particle, because you can imagine that there is interaction between each of the atom of the molecule together, and practically this means that the electron around the atoms will be navigating between the different atoms. There will be this cloud of where they will be repulsing, attracting themselves. So we are in a problem that is classically intractable because of the dimensionality. And this is when we look at such a formulation, we recognize some quantum states. And it is one of the reasons VQE has been kind of in the very first type of application we are expecting quantum computer to solve. So the way to solve VQE practically, we prepare some quantum states using variational form, so what you call an ansatz. And we have in the ansatz, we encode the proem. So for we need to encode the Hamiltonian. But we have also three parameters in the ansatz. There is some gates with three parameters that we can represent here with theta 1, theta 2, theta 4. And each value of the parameters, the parameters will make the complete circuit will be implementing some energy of the system. And the idea is to minimize the global energy of the system. So we calculate the energy of the system that is encoded thanks to the Hamiltonian that has been coding in the system with these parameters, theta e, theta I here. Then we make some measurement, calculate the energy. And then when we have the energy, we update the parameters classically till we converge to the minimal energy of the system. And then we have computed, the system will converge with the ground set energy of the system. So this is a kind of hybrid system where we are mixing the quantum approach, the quantum circuit, and the classical minimization. And the thing that is really native here is that the output of the system is the energy. So we can, and we know that's the energy because we have encoded, we have the Hamiltonian thanks to, we have decomposed the Hamiltonian in sequence of, on gates that we can mathematically calculate. So we know that when the system will reach what the system produces is the energy of the molecule that you have defined. And we can mathematically prove that this system will converge to the minimal energy will be what you are looking for. There is no possibility to go below this energy, and we can also prove the system will converge. So all of that is very nice and makes a very nice property of the system where we have well-defined the proem as simply updating parameters in the quantum hardware. We have well-defined the proem as the output of the system is what you are looking for, the value you are looking for. And we have well-defined the proem because we can prove that the system converge to the global minimum. So this is globally, it's a very interesting. We have everything ready to solve this type of problem using quantum device. So practically, when we are looking at Perceval, what we'll be doing will be building blocks like that. So for instance, in here you can recognize here a CNOT gate, as we have seen in the previous class. So it's a bit special, the CNOT gates in photonic. So this is the CNOT gate that you have in the orange block. Here we have three parameters, variable. You have here so another variables. And here in the green part, we have the ability to make rotations. So 1 qubit gates, and we know that 1 qubit gates are very easy to do in photonics. So we can make all the measurement we need for a system. And compute that. So this would be the way to do that in photonic circuit. And if we go bigger than that, you know that we have a chip, a 12-mode chip, physical chip that we can be using, hardware, or we can go to a 24 photon chip in simulation. And we will practically locate in the chip some part that will be doing implementing the entangling gates, so CNOT gates or whatever we need to implement the Hamiltonian. We have a block where we can encode variable, another block where we can encode variable, and we are keeping a part of the circuit here to make all the rotation we need. And then we iterate. So what is interesting here is that the theta 1, theta 2, theta 4, and theta 6 that we see here are physical parameters of the circuit, and the Hamiltonian is also physically implemented in some part of the circuit. And we are keeping here a part where we are making some basis rotation in the for VQ. So ideally, theoretically, it's ideal problem where we have the quantum hardware is very fit for that. Practically, it's not that easy because when you're looking at big molecules, then we are talking about a huge number of CNOT gates that you need to have to implement that. You are working on a large Hilbert space, so you need to make a lot of measurements in different bases. So you need to make a projection of the system in multiple bases to precisely measure the quantum state. And unfortunately, this type of RAM will require a very large number of sampling. So, and this is not only photonic. If you try to solve that on the Eagle architecture of Qiskit with 100 qubits, you are very quickly running out of credits because you need for each once you have defined your Hamiltonian, you encode your Hamiltonian inside the circuit, and then you start making some sampling. You need to make a lot of rotation to measure precisely your quantum state, and then you end up having a very large number of measurements to make. And then even a very simple molecule will be very hard to simulate on any near-term device today. So since the molecular parameters is complicated, we are trying to find other applications, and we are trying to use this type of logic, but for some other parameters. So here is one of the problems we work on with some of our partners, is try to find a strain and crack in a dam. And what we prove is that we can map such a mechanical problem, structural mechanical problem, in the same formulation than the VQE problem. So practically, I won't go into details, but we were able to find energetical formulation of the problem. And if we can find energetical formulation, then we can exactly express the same problem as a VQE problem, and then use VQE algorithm to solve this problem. Why this is interesting? So I just giving you some insight on that. You know that for a dam is a very large mechanical structure. So you can use mesh to model to make a numerical simulation of the mechanical constraint of any object, for instance, for a dam. And the size of the mesh will define the granularity of your calculation. So if you are taking 1 centimeter mesh, you can expect to have some idea of a crack that will be the size of the centimeter. If you take 1 meter mesh, then basically we consider that 1 meter block, concrete block, will behave as one single entity. So it will not be very fine grained. When you are talking about a dam or a nuclear plant, for instance, we are talking about mechanical structure that are huge, several kilometers, and in 3 dimensions. So in 3 dimensions and several kilometers, you can imagine that we cannot define a mesh as small as we want. So it is practical. Even thought we can define that very classically. We can define this problem very classically. We cannot solve it because of the dimension of the problem, and it is where the quantum algorithm is interesting because we have this transversal way of defining the problem, and maybe it can help refining the classical problem. So here we prove that we can define a unitary transformation for this problem. So it is again with our partner. Our partner here is EDF, which is the French electricity provider. We prove that we can define ansatz. That's all the prem was a simple tensorial product, and that we can, the most important is that we can prove that we needed also a few measurements to solve the problem. And we need, unlike what I was just mentioning in a global VQE frame, where we need a lot of measurement corresponding to all the projection of the quantum state you need to do. Here we need a very small number of measurements for implementing the frame. So for this type of frame, what we have proven is that where the system size is increasing, classically the computing time, the complexity of the frame is exponential, and we were able to show that we could reach logarithm complexity for the quantum approach, and with some crossing point here that we estimate around 20 photons, non-noisy photons, 20 photons. Meaning that if we are able to get a 20 photon without any noise, then we will be able to simulate the same type of system with less time than classically. So this is one of the applications of VQE. There is a lot of other applications of VQE, and I won't go into details, but my point is that VQE is kind of support here for defining other primes, and not just for as a goal, which is to find the ground state energy of a molecule. In this, for instance, in this approach, DMATE approach per fragment, we take a molecule that is very complex, like the one you see, and each of the molecule itself. So, unfortunately, it is the type of real molecule that we are interested in a lot of things. Here, in that case, it is for CO2 capture molecule. And then each fragment, we decompose such molecule in fragments, and we model each fragment, and then we can recombine and get some approximation of the global molecule by solving the VQE frame for each fragment of the molecule. So this is one of the approach that can be done. There is something else that is very interesting with VQE when you combine that with classical computing, is that you find the ground state energy of a molecule at a given state with a quantum computer, a VQE. Then you apply some classical equation of motion on this molecule. So this molecule will be in some special state with because it is in a, I don't know, in a chemical compound, or it is in the smoke, in a fire, or whatever. So you have some external force that apply to the molecule, and we can apply some of the source classically, and then recalculate the VQE. So here what you are calculating is not a static state of the molecule, but a dynamic state. So how the molecule evolve in time, combining steps where we are applying the quantum approach, and combining step where we are using classical equation. And we do that recursively to get the time modeling of the molecule. So, and key part, because the time is running, and I'm jumping to variational quantum algorithm. So when you hear about variational quantum algorithm, so it's inspired from VQE globally, but you don't need any formal Hamiltonian. So one of the prime of the VQE is that there is two prime. One, you need to have a formal Hamiltonian. So if you are talking about a molecule, you can compute the Hamiltonian, and after you need to decompose the Hamiltonian into some gates. In the case of VQA in general, you don't need any formal Hamiltonian, and we'll see in the notebooks that we'll be solving some classification problem with some VQA algorithm, where we don't exactly know what is the formal definition of the Hamiltonian. There is no Hamiltonian, we just iterate. So there is still the idea that we'll be making some iteration, But the training data is encoded within the circuit, and we'll see that. The expectation value maps to the training data. So for instance, if we are doing some classification, we'll be mapping the output of the circuits to the classification class, 0, 1, 0, 1, 2, whatever. And the goal is also to optimize some weights. We do a bit the same, in fact. So we encode some parameters and some data inside the circuit. And then we'll be iterating. So step by step, what we first thing is that we need to define how to encode the param. So you know the output of your system is just photon distribution. You are measuring the output of your system and just photon distribution. So you need to have a mapping between the photon distribution that you have in the output and your objective function. That is what you try to model. Again, if it is some variational, it is a classifier in class 1, 2, 3, then you need to find a way to map any photon distribution in 1, 2, 3. So here you can have some linear mapping, you can have some whatever type of mapping you want, but you need to first to define that. Then you create your parameterized quantum circuit, and what you are trying to minimize. So you want this to minimize your objective function. So with a loss function, so you say, okay, my classification, my model output 0, 1, 2, and then I want to compare that with some training data. So I need to define the loss function. So, and the goal is to get the minimal of the theta parameters here that will minimize the loss. So you measure your system simply. So you can add some logic at the end. And then when you have made some measurement, you classically optimize the parameters, and then you are fed back to the system and you repeat till you learn your circuit. So here we have kept the kind of the gist of the variational quantum eigensolver, VQE. But we don't have any Hamiltonian here. You don't see any Hamiltonian formulation in that param. It's just minimization of objective function from parameters. Classically, in Qiskit, when you want to define a quantum neural network, you do something like that. So what is defined as QNN in Qiskit, you have some qubits. You have your input that you map inside your system with a feature map, and we'll be seeing that there is multiple feature map that you can be using. At the end, you want to encode your parameters of your input data inside the quantum state. So the feature map needs to be smart enough to put all the information that you have in your input inside the quantum state. Then you have these weights, and this weight generated, there's some generic ansatz, and we'll see that, and there is some measurement. So this is how it is defined in Qiskit in gate-based system. Just one point about the sequence here. So here we see that we have the feature map on the left, and then we have the ansatz. If we look at this circuit, or at the very first that I show here, we see that we have the theta 1 before the X, before the input data. And the theta 2 is after, but we could have only one block theta 1 before, or only one block theta 2 after. So it really depends on what you want. And this is something a bit specific with photonics, is that in gate-based, you necessarily have a sequence where you input your input data, and then you transform your input data after the input. And this is sequential because a gate-based system is applying the gates one by one sequentially in time manner. In the photonic circuit, we have the unitary, the complete photonic circuit that applies simultaneously, instantly to your data. So the actual localization of your X and your theta on your chip don't matter. You can have your theta before your X. In some way, you're applying one single transformation. There is no way to break a photonic circuit into two and to say, okay, I will measure the photon's intermediate state. There is no way to measure the photon intermediate states in such a circuit. And one thing also that you need to remember is that we talked about the size of the photon that you are manipulating. You know that in quantum particles, you cannot have at the same time the speed and the position, the momentum and the position of quantum particle defined precisely. So there is some incertitude. So since we know how we emit the photons, we have some incertitude on the position. So the incertitude of the position we have in the photon we are manipulating are something like 5 centimeters. So the photon you are manipulating at 5 centimeters. The chip on which you will be making computation is 5 millimeters. So this shows kind of naively, but this shows that there is not even, it's not just a question of there is no way to go to the photonic chip and to make some probe inside the chip at different points. Is that technically your photons, as soon as they reach the chip, they are making the full computation. There is no intermediate state because of the size of the photon themselves. So it's not just a question of the speed of the photon, it's a question of your whole transformation is applied as a block. And because of that, you can put your parameters and your data wherever you want. There is not the notion of before or after in the photonic circuit. So I will jump quickly. I have some slide. I want to show the formulation of that in Penny Lane. So a few minutes, we'll talk about Penny Lane. I will go through quickly about that. I think that you have followed some Penny Lane class. Just in two words, what's Lane is doing is that it's kind of abstracting the notion of quantum of neural network with quantum. And it does that totally device independent. It works on multiple devices, and it does that very nicely. So it's a way to formalize what is a quantum neural network without even thinking about what is the hardware behind. So few words on Xanadu. You know that's one of the few companies that has proven some quantum advantage on the photonic chip. And they are developing 3 software. They are developing Strawberry Field, which is the simulation software for their platform, which is equivalent to Perceval for continuous variable for Candela. They're developing Penny Lane, and they're developing also FlamingPi, which is a very nice simulator for fault-tolerant quantum computing, both for continuous variable and for discrete variables. And here we are interested in Penny Lane. So in few words, how does the neural network work? So you probably know that, but in few words, I will just remind you what's working. So we are mapping input data into some layers, and the layers might have different size, and the transformation between layers are the operation that you are doing in the neural network. Here we have an image, and you see that the first transformation is to embed this image with as 3-dimension 224 times 3 to a larger dimension times 44. And then we apply linear and nonlinear transformation on this tensor till the point here where we are reaching one single dimension. So it's a tensor of 1.1 for 1000. So it is a vector. So we have mapped an image into a vector of dimension 1000. So it is what you call an embedding. And this could be done 3-point for any transformation behind generating text about this. You have all the information of your image in this vector here. So the neural network is doing behind the scene. You are in Python, for instance, when you are doing neural network, you are making some transformation, but in fact, what you are interested in is the computation graph. And in the computation graph itself, what you're interested in is the is the computation graph with that allow us to make the gradient descent. So backward propagation. So we are calculating the chain rule to back propagate the gradient. So very easily in Python. And this is how it is defined in PennyLane. So I just wanted to introduce that to define how it's defined in PennyLane. So PennyLane is using a quantum device, and it doesn't use qubits, it doesn't use modes, it uses what he called wires. So wires is very generic. You can apply whatever you want on the wires. It can be photon, it can be qubits. They just define wires. Then you define a quantum node. Here it's Eric's gate and expectation value on the policy measurement of your circuit. So very simple circuit and expectation value on one single measurement of your state. You define a classical node. Here you are mixing the output of the quantum node and some weight here, and then you are applying some transformation. So the whole neural network ID is summarized in PennyLane in this type of sequence where you just combine quantum node and classical node, and you are using an optimizer that will propagate gradients through the nodes backward to optimize your system. Here, your system quantum node is parameterized. There is one parameter, which is the X. And your cost function is also parameterized. There is one parameter that is the weights here. And you see that the complete system has two parameters, and you initialize the system with these two parameters. So it's a very nice modeling that PennyLane has introduced, where it's kind of, but what we need to understand is that it's just an abstraction layer. So behind the scene, we'll still be running exactly the same thing on quantum computer, but here we are abstracting what is being done. So the way it works is that, so the classical node works because we can make the computation of a function and we can make the auto differentiation. For the quantum node, you know that, and we said that before, we cannot compute any value out of a quantum node. We can just make a distribution of sample. So here we need to make error evaluation of the quantum nodes on your system. And then you have some observable that is what you want that will be manipulating output. Unlike the classical node, there is no native differentiation. So PennyLane has made a very nice job to define the possibility of calculating the Jacobian of a quantum node. And for that, they have introduced multiple methods. So there is methods where that is native to simulators. But there is also a way to have native gradient calculation on the quantum circuit with what you call parameter shift. And they have introduced this ability. So globally, when you manipulate the nodes in PennyLane quantum node, if the quantum node has some special features, then we can apply this feature to calculate the gradient. Otherwise, we just use finite difference method to calculate the gradient, which is what we'll be doing in the simulation today. We don't have a formal way to calculate the gradient, so we just estimate the gradient by doing finite difference between two values. So this is totally abstracted in PennyLane. So I'm skipping the shift rule in PennyLane. And what is nice in PennyLane is that you can combine multiple nodes, classical and quantum. For instance, the variational quantum eigensolver here is defined by this circuit, where you have first application of your Hamiltonian and two measurements, theta x and theta y, and then you combine that to calculate the condensate energy of the molecule. You can put a variational quantum classifier, which we'll be doing later today, where you encode your parameters, you apply your quantum circuit, and then you have a loss function, classical loss function. And you can even make some very complex circuits like generative adversarial networks like that, where you are training simultaneously two networks. One is trying to fool the other one, and you train them simultaneously. So it is the type of architecture we are using to generate image, for instance. And what is interesting in PennyLane, again, is that its abstraction layer that I've been doing makes that totally evident. We can mix quantum nodes and classical nodes straight away. So we'll be trying on notebook. So I'm done with my first hour. So I will make a short break, 5-minute breaks. In the meantime, so the next part of the session will be on notebooks. So you need to connect back on the QJupyter, and you need to check out the tutorials, or to update the tutorials that is on the Git that is given here. I'm taking a 4-minute breaks, and we are back at 10. 10 past 8. Do you have any question in this in meantime?
브레이크타임
Okay.
중에 질문 있으신 분들은 질문 부탁드립니다.
Okay, so let's start again in a few 4 minutes.
Thank you, John.
Okay, we'll start again. So on this part, we'll go back to Jupyter Notebooks as we have been doing in the last session. So you have the URL of the notebook that are given here, qjupyterjst.condola.dev. So either you remember your previous login, or you can create a new account. It doesn't matter. So to create an account, you just input your name and create the password here. So I will create a new one, Jean, class 9. You define whatever you want for your password. Okay, and then you need to check out the tutorial from that are on this URL. So you just go to github.com candela/tutorials here, and you can use it a notebook to check that to clone them. So git clone, or if you already have done that last time, you will just be doing from the tutorial directory. So you create a notebook in the tutorial directory. So I will be doing that. Discard. So you go there, and then you create a notebook, and then you make simply git update. No, git pull, sorry. Okay, so here it's up to date because I just did that, but probably if you are using same notebook than the previous time, then it will make some difference. It will pull some new things. Another way to do that also, if you want just to, if it doesn't work, you can create a directory here. You create class 9. You go to class 9, and then again you make the git clone. Okay, so you have in class 9, you have the full tutorial. So however you do, I expect you to have this checkout, and we'll be interested today in 3 tutorials: the Qiskit tutorial variable classifier, the PNL tutorial variable classifier, and the Perceval tutorial variable classifier. So they are implementing, the 3 of them are implementing exactly the same classification problem, and each of them has been made by the company. So the Qiskit tutorial on the variable classifier has been made by IBM. The Pennyline is provided by Xanadu, and the Perceval one is provided by us. So there is no bias. We are not trying to compare. We are just trying to understand the 3 different framework, and we don't care so much about the result we'll get. You will see that we'll be using some classification, but we are not so much interested in the result, but in the method that is being used behind, so that it gives you the more insight on the photonic implementation itself. So let's start with the Qiskit tutorial classification. Here. So the notebook is, we'll go through the notebook step by step. If you have any problem, if you are stuck or anything, please let me a message in the chat, and I will be answering there. So let's start. So you can find a notebook on the Qiskit ecosystem machine learning tutorial. So this one is coming from there. So the full notebook is there, and the one I'm giving you is a very slight adaptation where there is some some additional cells to understand what is going on, and some pip installation. So the first thing to do is to install the dependency module in the first cell. So this cells needs to be done only once. When you have done that, you can comment it or remove it. You won't need it anymore to run another time. It should be quite fast. So we are installing Keyskin Machine Learning, scikit-learn, and a few extensions to display the display things. So still running, it will take less than 1 minute together. Okay, it's complete. So, yes, you need to restart your notebook. Since you just make the pip install, you restart. And then you can restart from the second block here. So we are talking about the Iris dataset. So Iris dataset is one dataset that is defined and that is used by a lot of machine learning program. You know that in machine learning, there is this very well-defined dataset and shared dataset. So if you want to compare what you are doing with some other approach, then you use the same data, and it's exactly the same data that everybody is using. So it's very nice because it's a way that to compare and to make publication comparing with the same data. And you can find the Iris dataset very easily. Is dataset. Well, yes, and here so Wikipedia in English. This data set, so it's a very old data set, come from 1936, but it's you can see all the definition of your program in that data set, and we'll go through that. So it's very the nice thing is that it's something shared that scikit-learn has already stored a lot of this data set. So here we are loading the Iris data here, and we have some description. So we see that we have 150 data point instance in 3 class. So we have 3 class. It's a 3 class classification, and the class are these 3 names. So it's trying to classify flowers into 3 types of flowers based on some attributes, the features, and the features are the size and the weight of the sepal and the petal, basically. So it is the 4 features that we have, the 3 class that we try to classify into. And then you have some basic correlation. So we see here already that there is a strong correlation between the petal weight and some class and the petal length with some class. So we already know that there is some correlation here, and here there is almost no correlation on the sepal weight here. So you have all this information, you have paper, everything. So this is coming from scikit-learn, nothing special here. So here we can look at the data and the labels. So here the labels, it's 0, 1, 2. So it's the 3 class. The features is array of 150 with all the information that we defined just before, which were sepal length, width, length, and petal length and petal width. So this is what you get. Labels. Okay. The first thing that we are doing when you are doing classification is to kind of normalize the data. So here the notebook is introducing some normalization and some visualization of the data. That is very well done. So you see that you have your 4 features, sepal length, sepal width, petal length, and petal width, and you have the distribution of the different class with the each of the other features. So, for instance, we see that there is we see that the class 1 is far smaller in terms of length of the sepal than the other one, and we can also see the 2D representation. So we already, when you look at that, we can already see that we have two classes that are very intertwined. The green, which is the 2, and the orange, which is the 1, that are very mixed, in fact. We see that we can separate the blue very easily here. We can just make a line here, or we could make the vertical line here. We could separate the 0 and the two others, but the trick is probably to separate the 1 and the 2. Yeah, so it is the visualization of the data. And if you are not used to doing this type of training machine learning model, I always encourage you to look at the data before doing anything, because when you look, sometimes you see things that are obvious for human, and it's not necessary to do something very complicated if you can simply do something very simple that we can see in the data. So practically here, we could say, okay, I will classify my tree class, but I can also say, okay, let us define manually a classifier for the class 0. I can just draw a line here. If the petal length is lower than 2.5 centimeter, then it is a class 0. And then I could make a binary classification between class 1 and class 2 automatic. So we could make things manually before processing the data. But let us continue and do all of that automatically. The first thing that the notebook is doing is comparing that with scikit-learn with a SVM model. So SVM, support vector machine, are very used machine learning tools that were actually very popular before neural networks. Today we are talking a lot about neural networks, but SVM that are not neural network based have been used for years and are very efficient for a lot of problem, and are still used in a lot of problem where we don't need the power of a big neural network. So here we are using scikit-learn SVM. I'm taking classifier from SVM, and I will just fit my data with this classifier. So all the training has been done in that line, and you see that it's instantaneous. And then I can see that my score, my training score on my training data set is 99%. And on my test dataset is a bit lower. So it's normal. It's always the case that the score on the test dataset is lower than the training dataset. It's how it works. 1 second. Okay, so let us train a quantum model here with Qiskit machine learning. So they are using, in that case, they are using a ZZ feature map. So remember what I was telling you, in a quantum neural network, in Qiskit machine learning, you need 2 steps. The first step is to map your features into the circuit, and then the first part is that we'll be using. So here they are using ZZ feature map, which is one very popular feature mapping that Qiskit has been putting. And you can define the full description here. So what is interesting here is you see that it is mapping on 3 qubits your 3 parameters, x0, x1, x2. And what they are doing is that they are duplicating all of the parameters. So here there is a first injection of your parameters. Here we're using U1, and then they are making some untangling gates, and then you have a second second input of your parameter x0, x1 and x1, x2. Doing that, the parameters has been injected inside your qubit, but it has been injected everywhere. In fact, you see that the x0, x1, x2 is mangled in the 3 qubits because of this duplicate parameter coding. So it is one of the feature map. There is other feature map that you can find in Qiskit. For instance, there is a Z feature map that is the simplest one, where you see here that there is no untangling gate here. This is just repetition of the data. Yeah. So there is no real reason why to use one feature map or the other. It just depends. You need to test basically. So here they are using this ZZ feature map, and they are defining the first layer. So you see that since you have four inputs, so 4 features, so we'll be using 4 qubits. And we see that the 4 parameters are encoded here and encoded in second time here. I could use the Z feature maps as I was mentioning, and it is far simpler in that case. I don't have this repetition, and it's just inputting my data inside each qubit. We could use that, and you can use multiple feature map in input and to see how it makes the output change. So here I'm using this as a feature mapping, and then I'm using the ansatz that I will be using is real amplitudes. So again, we can look at what is real amplitudes in Qiskit definition, and you will see real amplitude. So it is one ansatz, very famous ansatz that has been used, that is used in classification methods. And you see that you have your theta, so it's not the feature that you are making, that you are coding here, it's the weight of your quantum neural network. So here we have these weights, you have some CNOT gates, weights, and CNOT gates. So again, it's really arbitrary. There is multiple way to encode and ansatz that you could use. This one is used commonly, so it's interesting to use it. It's called real amplitude because we only apply Ry, so your output will always be real. So it's always on the Y axis. So real amplitude, and the number of features is 4 again, because it's number of qubits. We'll apply on 4 qubits. So this is your feature map. This is your ansatz. And then here they are using some Kobila optimizer. So it's a very famous optimizer that is classical optimizer. We'll be using a sampler, so that means that we'll be using simulator here. We won't be using, so we could hook that to a real QPU, someone that you can find on Quantum Cloud, IBM Quantum Cloud. Here they are running that on the simulator. So definition of callback graph that will show that will make the system evolve as it goes, and then the VQC itself. So they are using VQC from Qiskit machine learning classifiers. The parameters are the sampler itself that you have defined here, the feature map, that is this guy, and the ansatz, that is this guy, where we'll have our weights here. We are using the optimizer, Kobila optimizer here, and the callback just to display the data as it is being trained. And you can see your training interactively train here. The objective function has been defined. So there is 100 iteration of the Kobila. And the objective function is defined as yes, it is defined by VQC itself. So it will be the max entropy between your output distribution and what you are expecting. Yeah. So you see that your objective function is decreasing. So we don't see directly the objective function. It's embedded inside the definition of Qiskit machine learning classifier. If you look at the code, you will see how it is defined. And we see the convergence of your cross entropy. I think it's cross entropy objective function. So the cross entropy is decreasing. Minimal value should be 1. And you should have that also running on your side. And we see that it's progressively converging here. So at the beginning, there was a lot of iteration, which is totally normal in classical training. And then there is some convergence here. The parameters have converged to this to some value, with the minimal value for the cross entropy. And then we can evaluate how it works. And we have this classification. So it's not that good. 85% or 87% on the test data set. So what can we do since it's not that good? We can see first if we didn't stop the training too early. So we stop at 100, we could have stopped at 200 to see if it would have been improved. We can change the optimizer itself. Here we are using the ansatz, the ansatz. We can try another ansatz. We can try another feature mapping. And this is this is kind of the normal approach when you are doing machine learning. It's try and do it again. So it's not abnormal that you need to do it again. The third thing that it's a little bit disappointing that the default score is very low compared to what scikit-learn was doing. Scikit-learn was very simple SVM, was getting a 97% accuracy straight away. So again, we don't really interested in the results, so it's not comparison. So, but let's not, again, that's here in that notebook, we are running on the simulator. And you see how Qiskit is exposing the function. It's exposing the function through some formalism that is very close to scikit-learn here. Scikit-learn syntax was given here. You fit a model from a SVC. It's exactly the same that we'll be doing here. We'll be fitting a model from a defined VQC here. So they have kind of mapped the syntax of scikit-learn here for a classifier. And the fact that you have the callback display this graph and so on. And okay. Please explore around that. So it's very interesting to see if we can improve that score because we expect, since we are on the simulator, to get a better score. We have 4 qubits, so 4 qubits is quite large system for a very simple task. So we would expect to get at least 90%, 95% here. And we kind of know that the problem is easy. We know that the class 0 is very simple to separate. And the class 1, if you look at, for instance, at this projection here, it seems to be easy to separate the class 0 and class 1. There is a line to draw here or here. So even humanly, with very simple method, we kind of expect to get better than 85% separation. So I'm done on the Qiskit, which is kind of the baseline system. I will show the PennyLane. And one of the reasons I want to show PennyLane is that we are showing first some implementation that is based on quantum circuit, concrete, but not based on hardware. Here, there is nothing close to the hardware in the Qiskit. It's you never specify the hardware, so there is no noise model, there is nothing. So it's kind of intermediate level. We'll go to Penny Lane. Penny Lane will be doing classification at even higher level. We won't even see what is the circuit. We will define the circuit as a quantum neural network, as we defined in the first hour. And so very high abstraction level will be Penny Lane, intermediate abstraction level will be Qiskit, and then we'll end with Perceval, where we'll go at the hardware level, and we'll see what we can do at hardware level in photonic. No question? Okay. Moving at Penny Lane. So again, as mentioned, Penny Lane is this notebook. I've not done the notebook. I've taken the notebook from Penny Lane online notebook that you can find here. So it has been done by Xanadu itself, iris classification. And I just updated a few things in the notebook just to be able to run that independently. But basically, if you want to have more information, please refer to that part. And I didn't write that. It has been written by Marielle Schulz, that is in the quantum machine learning team at Xanadu. Okay, so running that, so we need first to install Penny Lane. Okay, it will be quite fast. It should be done. Yes, we need Matplotlib, but it has already been installed in previously, so I won't install it anymore again. Again, don't forget to restart your notebook, because we need to use Penny Lane that we just installed. And let us start. So here, something I didn't tell you, but if you're familiar with Penny Lane, you know that Penny Lane is using multiple auto differentiation model. It can use the one from Torch, PyTorch. It can use the one from TensorFlow, or it can use the one from JAX or from NumPy. In that case, we are using the one from NumPy. And Penny Lane is embedding some slightly updated version of NumPy inside Penny Lane. So the NumPy version we are using is inside Penny Lane, and we'll be using the auto differentiation from NumPy itself. And they are using some optimizer, so Nesterov momentum optimizer. So it's not Kobila, so which is a classical optimizer for finding minimum. In that case, we are really talking about neural network optimizer. I don't know myself what is Nesterov momentum optimizer details, but we know that the fact that there is a momentum means that during the gradient descent is giving us a gradient, and from the gradient we apply some modification based on the optimizer itself. And optimizer with momentum means that they are following they give some speed to the gradient descent. So you can imagine that you are following some paths downward the mountain, and the momentum makes that even if there is some change of gradient, some change of direction, it will continue going in the previous direction a little bit. It keeps a momentum. So why the Nesterov and why the one, I don't know. So again, it's very experimental, heuristic. You try one, and if it works, then you're happy. If it doesn't work, you try another one, and then you continue. So they define the virtual quantum device. So default.qubit is no hardware, it's a pure simulator. We'll be doing also the classification. So I will come back to that. I will explain what is being done here. So yes, so what they will be doing, they will be projecting they will be transforming the features into some rotation, and this is defined in this reference here. Yes, it is this, so the feature map they will be doing is this one, where they will be using one of the qubit only to encode their feature map. And the feature map is here we are talking about the angle of the rotation. So what they will be doing is they will be transforming features that are not rotation, that are just value between, you remember in Qiskit, we saw that the value was between 0 and 8 or 0 and 5 to 2 and 5. They will be transforming that into some rotation. So it is this rotation that they are doing here. So we'll be showing how it works. So here, if they are taking these features, they are transforming that to as a rotation, and then they are showing that we can recover the feature value as the amplitude vector of the generated state. So here, the state preparation takes the rotation, the angle rotation, and then at the end, the amplitude vector is encoding exactly the feature map. So what they are doing, they are encoding their feature as the amplitude of the different features here. So for that, if the case, that means that we need to have some normalization. So let us skip that. So we see that's a different method of mapping than the one that was done in Qiskit. They will be defining a layer. Each layer basically is a CNOT, a rotation and CNOT. So it's really look like wire. So they will be using 2 qubits, and they will be using making a rotation in each of the qubits. So if you look at Qiskit, it looks like a bit this one, 2 rotation, a CNOT gate here. This layer, and this is one layer. They will be making multiple layer. Then they are using the square loss of the prediction. So square loss will be the distance between the prediction and the gold value, the expected value. So this is defining the neural network and the mapping and the parameters here. So the parameters are here. The feature mapping is here in the state preparation. And now they will be using some updated value of the Iris dataset. So here we need to be a little bit careful, because here we see that they are using some dataset that they have been saving themselves. So it's not the one that is from scikit-learn. It's the one that they have adapted, and we can look at the data, and here we will see the data. And basically, we see that they have kept from the data only 2 class and not 3. And they have kept, in fact, the simplest class. If we look at the Iris dataset here, this one is to be compared with this one. And you see that basically they have kept the class 0 and the class 1. And they have simply dropped the class 2. So it's a bit like cheating. So I don't know why they did that. They kept only the 3 class and not the 3 class themselves. And the problem they are now they're considering is very simple. It's this 2 class classification problem that we can manually solve by just drawing a line here. So I don't know why they did that. They simplified their data. Is the approach working for 3 class? Probably, but I don't know why they didn't do that. And again, it's the author that made that. So let us go through here. So here they are permutating their data so that they can extract training data and testing data. Here they are taking 75% of the data points. So 100 data points, they are taking 75% for the training and 25% for the testing. And then, so they define 2 qubits. It is what we gathered earlier. And 6 layers. 6 layers means that every time they will be repeating that layer. So that layer will be rotation C naught. If we compare that to Qiskit again, with the ansatz we used here, the ansatz you use had only 4 layers. 1, 2, 3, 4 layers. So they are taking more layers than what Qiskit was doing in that case. Okay, Penny Lane. Okay, they initialize the weights randomly. It is always what we do. They are using also some bias, which is some additional weights that they will be adding to the result at the end. Here, defining the accuracy just to compute the ratio of correct sentence. And their quantum classifier is defined as the circuit plus the bias. So they are adding the bias to the weight. So the bias allows us to make some translation from the classification on one dimension. So it's one dimension bias. And the circuit that they are using is state preparation. Remember, it is the rotation to get the real amplitude of the features inside the circuit. It is what we saw here, amplitude vector. Then adding the layers that are exactly the same than layers than what Qiskit was doing here. It is this and that. And then they are taking the expectation value on poly rotation here, which is their classification that we'll be doing. The circuit is called by the variational classifier. So this is a classical node. This is a quantum node running on the device dev. And the loss function is defined as the square loss between labels and the prediction. It is what we saw earlier. So here is the definition of the prem, and then we are running the prem. We are running it. Oh, so I have some error. Yes, I didn't run the sentence here. Yeah, I forgot that. Okay. So you see that the training is on its way, going quite fast. And the accuracy on the validation set is 100%. It's 1, 0. Actually, with only 40 iterations, it was already 1. So it seems a bit magical. But remember that they are classifying only 2 classes, class 0 and class 1. Actually, it's -1 and 1. Because it's an expectation value. And then they are just learned that curve, which is something very trivial, very obvious that we could have done manually in that case. That makes the full classification in that case. So it works very well, but they have reproduced simplified their prem. Again, we are not trying to make some comparison of the technique. We are just trying to understand what they have been doing. So in short, you saw that the definition of the neural network itself, quantum neural network, is very elegant. It is these 3 lines where they define everything, the circuit, the classifier, and the loss function. It's defined by these 3 lines here, which is the kind of abstraction layer that Penny Lane is adding on top of the formalism. Yeah, you don't see a real difference between a classical node and a quantum node and a classical node. It is just this decorator here that makes the difference between the two of them. And the optimization function is very simple. It's something that you find in every optimizer. So we didn't see that in Qiskit because it was embedded in the VQC class. But basically, what they are doing is that they are going for 60 epochs. They are starting from a random point. They are iterating step by step on this on this 60 iteration, and at every time they are calculating the updated weights and bias using gradient descent here. And then from that they are calculating the accuracy on the training set, on the validation set, and they are displaying that every second, every other epoch. So all this is for the display. So the whole training, in fact, is kind of these 4 lines here. So this 4 line plus this definition of the problem is making the full definition, full training system here. So what can we improve on our side if we wanted to update that? So here we see that there is nothing a bit special to PennyLane. They are just using some qubits simulation behind the scenes. So basically they should get the same result than Qiskit, because the definition of the layers is just defining a Qiskit, a gate-based approach here. So we could reproduce exactly the same thing that we did with Qiskit with PennyLane, and I'll let you play with that. But you see the difference here. We are not even looking at. We don't even see the quantum circuit. In Qiskit, we are seeing the quantum circuit, the details. Here we don't even see that. We see that as function, the quantum dots. So it's really the reason why I wanted to introduce PennyLane here. The difference of formalism here. Okay, so we are done with PennyLane. And if you don't know PennyLane, I encourage you to look at that. It's a very nice and very neat framework. Again, it doesn't bring anything value for specific hardware, but in terms of formalization, it's a very high level. So it's very interesting to look at. We'll switch to the last notebook, but I see that we're already at the end of the session, so I will just introduce and we'll continue that tomorrow morning, just to give you some insight of what we'll be doing tomorrow. So tomorrow we'll be running that on Askella. So this notebook has been done by research engineer at Candela, Dario and Alexia. And it's part of the publication on Askella that we have made on Nature Photonics, where it's one of the tasks that we have described in the paper. And this task is actually running on QPU. So on our side, tomorrow we'll be running that on the simulator, because we cannot run all of us at the same time on the QPU. But you're welcome if you want to try that on the QPU. You have cloud access. And we have granted you, all of you, with access to GPU simulator and to QPU, so you can run the circuit and whatever you want on the QPU. So I will stop here for today, and tomorrow morning we'll start again. We'll be running this notebook in detail. So it's a bit long, and it's not as clear as the other notebook, I must admit, but we are doing something a bit different. So we'll be trying to understand what is happening there, and what is the real difference between doing that on this physical hardware, than on the gate base. And then we'll be moving to another type of frame, which is another algorithm. This is a QUBO algorithm. QUBO stands for quadratic binary optimization problem. So I will be giving you some description of the QUBO problem, and we'll be doing some action on QUBO manually in a notebook. QUBO is not variational by itself, so it's really some different type of algorithm, but we'll be seeing that basically what we'll be trying to do, some variational algorithm a bit differently than what we are doing here. There is no X, there is no theta exactly the same way, but it will be what we'll be doing as for solving the QUBO problem. I remind you that on Friday we'll end the session with a small test. So it will be a online quiz that you will be passing. The online quiz will give you access to, so it's quite easy. Honestly, it's very basic on Perceval and on different class that we have been doing so far. So no need really to work too much to prepare that. It will be quite easy. The main point is it's kind of validating the training session. It's 12 session training session, and this will give you access to a certificate of training from Q-Center and Candela. Any question for today?
질문 있으신가요? No more. No questions.
Okay, thank you very much. I know it's not that it's a bit indigest to go through all of that, but it's at the same time it's very interesting to look at different framework, to go look at details of implementation. And this really makes the bridge between theory, hardware, and the application, because application is the only thing that quantum is interested at the end of the day. Is we are building this wonderful machine to do something that it can be used for some application, some real case application. So it's from my side, it's really going to the detail of the application is the most important. Eventually, it will prove that quantum people are working on something that is useful. Thank you, and see you tomorrow morning. See you
Yep, see you
afternoon.
tomorrow. Thank you very much, John.
Bye.
오늘 참석해주신 분들 감사드립니다. 내일 같은 시간에 또 뵙겠습니다.